Good morning to you. Welcome to my thought for the day. We are reaching the end of chapter 20. Well, we're halfway through chapter 20. We have this curious question that came from the Sadducees. The Sadducees were a group of religious leaders who taught that resurrection didn't happen, that there would be no resurrection, that there was no future life. And it is they who come to Jesus and ask him a question about the resurrection. I am surprised that Jesus didn't just say to them, "Why are you asking me about something you don't believe in?" I'm surprised he didn't say, "Well, I'm not going to answer that unless you tell me that you believe in the resurrection." But Jesus makes it clear, as he answers them, that he has no doubt at all about life after this life, about the resurrection, and where God is and how God relates to the people of this world. The question is about a very large family of 7 brothers, and the first one marries a wife, and she is widowed without children. And the law said that if there were no children to carry on the name of the person who died, then his brother should take his wife, and the first child that was born to them would be named for the brother that had died. And this ridiculous story is told. I suppose it might have happened, but it's a very far-fetched story, that each time this woman was passed to the next brother because one had died, she did not have a child, and she ended up dying after all of them, after all 7 had died and there were no children. And the question they ask him is, in the resurrection, whose wife will she be? And Jesus, I wonder whether Jesus really laughed at them and thought, they don't believe these 7 brothers and the wife are going to rise and come back to life. So why are they asking me this question? But he makes 2 points which are interesting for us to, that the world we're going to go into is different to this world. In this world, there is marriage, there is giving and taking in marriage, there is living together, there is working together in marriage. But in the resurrection, there is no giving and taking in marriage. So that's quite straightforward. And the reason he says it is because they cannot die anymore. And I think the reason Jesus said this was because the marriage covenant is a covenant until death do us part. And if there is no death, there is that covenant. If a new covenant is taken up when you can't die, that covenant would never end. I don't know whether that's my educated guess as to why Jesus added that little bit in this story. And then he says, then he addresses the fact that resurrection exists. Then he says to them, but that people are raised from the dead is evidenced by the way that Moses spoke, and that Moses wrote about the bush when he met God, and he called God, although God called himself, I am that I am, I am. Moses called him the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. And of course for Moses, Abraham, Isaac and Jacob were all his ancestors. They had all died. They were not alive anymore, they were dead. And Moses demonstrated in his language, in the way he spoke, that these 3 were alive and God was still the God of these 3. He is not God of the dead, but of the living, for all live in him. the resurrection is a certainty. God is outside of time. God is in another place to which we will all go. And when we fall asleep, if and when we fall asleep, when Jesus comes back and we rise to meet him in the air, we will experience resurrection, the first resurrection, and then at the end of the age, all will come back to life for judgment. And we are privileged because we do not have to face judgment. But Jesus made it quite clear in all his teaching that he had absolutely no doubt about eternity and about life after death. And he wanted to persuade these Sadducees who didn't believe in the resurrection, that the resurrection was real. And their answer was, "You've spoken well." So I think he did reach them in some way. They understood what he was saying, and maybe they were challenged. And I'm sure when Jesus rose from the dead and when the preaching happened at Pentecost, that some of those in the group who listened would have been Sadducees. And we may well meet Sadducees in glory because they may have turned to Jesus. But it does say they no longer dared to ask him any questions. They tried all sorts of ways to trip him up, but they couldn't trip him up at all. But if you've ever doubted about resurrection, if you've ever doubted about what happens, it all hinges on the resurrection of Jesus. If you believe that Jesus rose from the dead. See, when other people were raised from the dead, like the widow's son raised by Elisha, and Lazarus raised by Jesus, and the widow of Nain's son raised by Jesus, they would all have eventually physically died again. Because they're not still alive now. You can't go and meet Lazarus now. But Jesus died and rose and came back to his disciples with the body, a cured, healed, perfect body that he had before. And this is a different resurrection to the raising from the dead that the others experienced. And it is the raising to eternal life. Jesus, the firstborn from the dead. And we, because we believe in him, because he lives, we will live also. And if we don't believe that, then there's no point in being a Christian at all. If you're hoping only for this life, if you have no expectation of anything after you die, then you're wasting your time and it's futile. It's pointless. It's pointless laying up treasure in heaven if there isn't a heaven. It's pointless thinking about the future and preparing for it if there is no future. No, settle in your mind once and for all that Jesus rose from the dead and he did not die again. He did not die again, and he is present with the Father in heaven with the glorified body, the body that he had on earth, glorified and sanctified and perfect and healthy, bearing the scars that he took for us. My time is up. Time to say goodbye and wish you God's blessing, and I hope you manage to stay cool enough to survive today, and I'll see you again tomorrow. God bless you. Bye-bye.